Excellent.
So we're going to start on time. And those of you who are joining us as we do this, welcome. Welcome to this event about carbon capture and storage. I'm Alice DeWolf, a board member of the Sentinel Educational Foundation, and I'm co-hosting this event with Zoe Blunt and Doris Broughton, who are both editors of the Watershed Sentinel magazine. As we're settling in, it would be great if you would take a moment to let us know in the chat where you're based, on the land and the Indigenous people that you acknowledge. And of course, if you're having any difficulties, let us know in the chat. We'll see if we can help you work that out. The session's being recorded and will be available at the Watershed Sentinel website, which, as many of you know, is www.watershedsentinel.ca. So today we're hosting this event from the territory of the Comox First Nation. And that includes the people of the Pentlach, the Ayikson, the Sasitla, the Hehe, and the Sathlut people. We recognize that we weren't invited to settle here, and we must constantly work to reconcile this and to honor and appreciate the original people's experience, their generosity, and their traditions. They constantly teach us that the beauty, the abundance, and the ferocity of this land, the air and the water around us are inseparable from our well-being as individuals and as community. And it's in this kind of spirit that we've organized these Watershed Sentinel webinars to keep us informed about how technologies and industrial projects impact our land, our waters, and our communities. We also are using them to dive a bit deeper into articles that are published in the magazine, in this case, in the April-May issue. We hope this session will provide you with more information and resources related to carbon capture and storage and transportation, which you'll find being added to the discussion, and about the large concerns about this technology. Our conversation is timely. I don't know whether you noticed, but during the leaders' debates 3 weeks ago, our now Prime Minister, Mark Carney, said, quotes, "One of the big projects that we need to move forward with is carbon capture and storage, the Pathways Project, so that we have oil and gas that's competitive not just today, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now." In the next hour, we'll hear more about the Pathways Project and its potential impact on Northern and Indigenous communities, as well as the finances of the country. Two people are with us who bring tremendous knowledge and experience. Jeremy Appel will start with an introduction to carbon capture and storage and how it works, if there are any successful projects in the world, and what the economics of it might be for Canadian companies and taxpayers. Then Nigel Robinson will highlight the issues with an aspect that's not often mentioned in the discussion, that is the transportation of liquefied CO2. In our case, this means the Pathways pipeline that's proposed to run through Northern and Indigenous communities. We'll hear about the next steps in Keepers of the Waters campaign to raise community awareness. So we imagine that you may have questions during these presentations. And if you do, or when you do, please put them in the chat, and we'll ask our resource people to respond in the 20-minute discussion that we'll have towards the end of the session. So Dolores and Zoe, it's over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to just basically pass this over to Zoe Blunt, who is, she's been an environmental activist and campaigner for a very long time and a great supporter of Indigenous rights. And she's now the new editor of the Watershed Sentinel. And I'm happily retiring, I'm happy to say, back to being executive editor. So I'm sort of an editor, but not really. And Zoe's the editor, and she's going to introduce people and ask questions.
Right. Thank you, Dolores. This session, as you know, is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, Watershed Sentinel YouTube channel, and also on our radio podcast channel, which is on Mixcloud and on cvox.ca. So thank you very much for coming today. I'm going to introduce Jeremy here. Jeremy Appel is a independent Edmonton-based journalist who writes the Orchard newsletter on Substack, and he's the author of the 2024 book Kennyism, Jason Kenney's Pursuit of Power. So Jeremy, we're going to kick it off here. What do we need to know about carbon capture and storage?
Thanks so much for that flattering introduction, Zoe, and to all the people at Watershed Sentinel for having me here today, and for having me write a piece for you last month. In that article, which was published a couple weeks ago, I described carbon capture, utilization, storage, or CCUS for short, as the fossil fuel industry's last stand. This technology is supposed to suck CO2 out of the air when fossil fuels are burned and either use it for another purpose or inject it underground for storage indefinitely. A 2023 study from Oil Change International found that about 80% of captured carbon worldwide has gone towards enhanced oil recovery. So using CO2 to drill for more oil, which simply displaces emissions elsewhere, right? The majority of CO2 emissions don't come from the production side. They come from downstream uses of fossil fuels, chief among them in transportation or electricity for those electric grids that are still dependent on fossil fuels, like here in Alberta and in neighboring Saskatchewan. This is an attractive prospect for fossil fuel companies because it allows them to increase production while theoretically reducing emissions, but in practice, just pushing them downstream. There are many problems with this, as viewers, I'm sure, can imagine. But I want to focus on two of them, which is that, first of all, it's not viable from a financial perspective and requires massive and ongoing and increasing government subsidies. The larger the project, the more subsidies it requires. And the more production is increased, the more CO2 is being captured, the more it costs to operate. And the other problem is that it simply doesn't exist on the scale necessary to make a major dent in Canadian, but also global CO2 emissions. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, CCUS sequesters an annual grand total of 50 megatons or 50 million tons of CO2 internationally. Now, by contrast, Canada alone emitted 694 megatons, so 694 million tons of CO2 in just 2023. Nonetheless, CCUS is a key component of the federal Liberals' emissions reduction plan. Last year, the federal government, while Justin Trudeau was still prime minister, implemented a 50% tax credit for CCUS projects under the condition, to their credit, that the sequestered carbon isn't used for enhanced oil recovery. The Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program offers 12% in tax, a 12% tax credit with no such restrictions. You can use it for whatever you want. And I wanted to focus on three major CCUS projects that are in operation in Canada right now, two of which are in Alberta. These have required major subsidies from their provincial and the federal government, as well as the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board in one case. In 2014, the Boundary Dam coal-fired power plant near Estevan, Saskatchewan, became the world's first CCUS project at a power station. And it remains the only one at a coal-fired power station. This project was entirely government funded, and it wasn't cheap. The government of Saskatchewan paid $1.2 billion, and the feds paid $240 million to retrofit the plant with CCUS. Now, the Boundary Dam is owned by Sask Power, which is a publicly owned utility company, meaning that any additional costs are automatically going to be borne by people who pay electric bills in Saskatchewan. The following year, in 2015, Shell's Quest CCUS project began operations at the Scotford Upgrader in just outside of Edmonton. The Scotford facility uses natural gas to produce what's called blue hydrogen, which is then used to upgrade bitumen from the tar sands, mostly, into synthetic crude oil. The CCUS contraption there captures steam methane from natural gas production only, not any of the flue gas that comes out of the facility smokestack. So its scope is limited to a portion of the facility's CO2 emissions, and that's important to keep in mind. 3/4 of its initial upfront costs were covered by the government. The province paid $745 million, and the federal government chipped in $120 million. Since 2016, the project's operating costs have more than doubled. Those increased costs are being subsidized by provincial tax credits. And the most recent of these projects I wanted to focus on is the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, which opened in 2020. This is a pipeline that takes carbon captured from the Sturgeon refinery, so the Shell's Quest project, as well as the Redwater fertilizer plant, which is also outside Edmonton, and transfers it to aging oil and gas wells in central and southern Alberta for enhanced oil recovery. So this isn't eligible for the federal tax credit, although it is for the provincial one. 70% of the project's initial cost was subsidized by government. Almost $500 million came from the province, 60 million came from the feds, and 300 million came from the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. So your pension is invested in a carbon capture pipeline that is going to drill for more oil and therefore increase CO2 emissions in the long run. These costs are only growing. In all three cases, a study from last year coming out of the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Performance found that the total costs for CCUS projects in Alberta are, quote, approaching thresholds that threaten profitability, unquote. Report author Mark Kallega told DSMOG, the online environmentalist news site, that this would, in his words, require permanent government subsidies to continue. So, okay, you get the point. These projects are expensive, but are they effective? Are maybe we're getting value for the public funds that are being spent on these projects if they're performing up to or better than expected, right? And I don't think it will surprise you to learn that the answer to that is no. The Boundary Dam project is a great example of this. It was supposed to capture 90% of emissions from the power plant. That tends to be the sort of threshold that industry is advising, that CCUS can capture 90% of emissions. But Boundary Dam's average annual capture rate over its first decade of existence is 57%. So just a bit over half of its CO2 emissions were actually getting captured. Shell Quest is billed as the most effective carbon capture project in the world in terms of the sheer amount of CO2 that it's captured since it's been in operation. Between 2015 and 2019, it captured 5 megatons of CO2, which sounds impressive, right? That's 5 million tons. Except it emitted 7.5 million megatons in that time span. So it emitted more than it was actually capturing. And while 90% was the target of emissions captured from the methane, the methane steam, the plant averages out at about 80%, so underperforming a bit. But if we account for all the emissions associated with production at the Scotford facility, then the number of emissions captured is actually closer to 40%. So, almost so half. But the holy grail of CCUS is the proposed Pathways Alliance mega project in Northern Alberta, which I think Nigel is going to tell you more about in terms of organizing communities against this project and the risks that it entails. But I'll just tell you a bit about it in the context that I'm talking about CCUS, right? The cost and the efficacy. So Pathways Alliance is composed of the 6 biggest players in the tar sands that together make up 95% of production. They're proposing a $16.5 billion project to capture carbon from 13 tar sands facilities, put them into a network of pipelines pumping CO2 underground to a storage facility near Cold Lake. These companies, who've made astronomical profits over the past few years, want more than just existing provincial and federal subsidies for the project. Brad Corson, CEO of Imperial Oil, one of the companies that make up the alliance, told Calgary Herald columnist Chris Varco, quote, "Today we have 50% investment tax credit from the federal government. We have an additional 12% capital support from the provincial government. So there's 62%. We've said we need 75%. Imperial Oil, by the way, made almost $5 billion in profit last year. Now, we can't evaluate the efficacy of a project that doesn't exist yet and hasn't even been approved. But Pathways Alliance responding to federal regulations requiring companies to provide evidence for environmental claims by scrubbing its entire website doesn't exactly inspire confidence that the project is going to do what it says it does, which is contribute to Canada reaching net zero by 2050. And so to wrap up, I know I'm a bit over time, is that we have all this money being thrown at these unscientific projects. And the purpose is to delay the inevitable energy transition so established players can drill until the last drop and make a killing doing so. Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you. Thank you very much for leading us into this. It's for many of us, the differences between capturing for this use and for that different use and is all sort of new territory. And I really appreciate your introduction to it and your focus on the sort of continued cost, if not the improbability and the unsuccessfulness of these projects in terms of actually how much carbon they capture. So I'd really, stay on it. Thank you very, very much for continuing to do the work for the rest of us. I would like to just also note for everybody who's here that one of the other people who's online with us right now is Jesse Cardinal, who's another lead in the Keepers of the Water project. Zoe.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And thank you very much for the questions in the chat as well. Some of them may be answered as we go along, but we'll be coming back to those questions in the Q&A and in the chat at the Q&A session. First, more importantly, we're going to hear from Nigel Robinson next. He is leading a community information campaign about carbon capture and storage. He's a Dene organizer and a radio host from Cold Lake First Nations in Alberta. He's the community engagement coordinator for Keepers of the Waters, which many of you know is an Indigenous-led organization dedicated to protecting land and water by exercising Indigenous sovereignty and applying the spirit and intent of treaty. So Nigel, thank you very much for joining us here. And can you tell us, how is carbon capture and storage affecting communities in northern Alberta?
Hi there, folks. Zoe, I will get to your question in one moment.
Okay.
I need to introduce myself to folks. So yeah, Zoe did introduce me, but I am from Cold Lake First Nations, otherwise known as Lue Choktue in our traditional tongue, which is our translation for it is Big Fish Lake. And I have been an organizer in our different climate justice and Indigenous rights based organizing world for about 10 years now. And I've been involved with Keepers of the Water for about 6 years. and it's kind of been a quite the process for me to kind of get onboarded with this issue. Last summer, Jesse, our executive director, called in with me and had me come in and listen to a very, very eye-opening call that was held. And there was a number of really incredible speakers on it who had some really in-depth knowledge on this carbon capture issue. Now, after hearing about this, the plan was for us to put together a presentation with all the best information and science that we had and bring it to communities. And by that time, I had already known that last summer, 2024, Pathways Alliance had already targeted my community to do specifically a elders consultation, and then a general public consultation. And once we had put together our presentation with some of the incredible folks in our network here in so-called Canada, I brought it to Cold Lake First Nations in October, and we had the chief come out, Chief Kelsey Jacko, who's been extremely vocal on this issue, as well as folks from our Land and Resources Department who have been who shared a lot about what happened in those community consultations. And what I can tell you right out the gate is they don't talk about any of the risks of the project, which is extremely problematic. And they go on about the benefits and how it's going to be really great for our community and how we don't actually need to worry about it because this was a major issue for my uncle Kelsey Jacko. The pipeline is going to be on private land, so it won't impact our drinking water. And there's no guarantee that our drinking water won't be impacted. And Jeremy, he gave a really great overview of what it's going to look like. But there's one thing that I kind of really want to bring up, and it's a pipeline rupture that happened in Yazoo County, Mississippi, which I think everyone here needs to look into and get educated on. It was an incident where there was a massive pipeline rupture. The liquidized carbon is highly pressurized, and it's very dangerous. There's many chemicals that are injected into the inside of the carbon to help keep it liquid so that it can travel along the pipeline route. And there's things that cause eye irritation in there: MDEA, MEA, which is a irritant to eyes, and skin. There's AMP, skin and eye. It causes skin and eye irritation. One of the really important ones to know is that DIPA, DIPA is in there, and it can cause respiratory issues with inhalation. And one of the people who was impacted by this pipeline break, beyond the animals and the plants that were impacted, and we don't have numbers on what that looked like, but one thing to know is that carbon, it displaces oxygen and air. So when there's massive amounts of carbon rolling and kind of dispersing, it will turn off an engine. And there was a man who his name is Damaris DeBray Burns, and he was driving along a rural road in Satartia, Mississippi, and his vehicle turned off, and then himself and his two relatives who were on his way to go fishing, they passed out in the vehicle. And sometime later, the responding fire chief, Jerry Briggs, he got a call. Well, he got many calls from residents that there was an emergency happening, and then they called the pipeline company, and it was only about an hour after after all of the stuff started happening. They talked with the pipeline company, and the pipeline company said, yeah, we experienced a massive depressurization in the pipe. And they didn't think to call Jerry Briggs or warn the residents. It was the fire marshal who had to go ahead and call the pipeline company to find out this information. So when they responded, they brought a golf cart, an electric golf cart. And when they found Damaris's body and his two relatives, thankfully they were still alive, and they loaded up the golf cart. And Damaris was worried that if he, Jerry Briggs, I mean, was worried that if he didn't take Damaris and his two relatives in the golf cart all at once, one of them might perish. So he brought them to the hospital, and they woke up a few hours later, and they were able to be let go and go home. But the next day, they had to return to hospital, and they had to be put on oxygen tanks because they had respiratory issues for months afterwards. And I believe that CBC went out and they did a check-in with them, and some of them are still experiencing respiratory issues to this day. And it was 45 people who were hospitalized in this particular incident, and 300 who were completely evacuated. And that is something that my chief, Kelsey Jacko, found absolutely shocking, because they didn't mention it at all, and they didn't mention any of the risks that could happen. And beyond that, I know that our treaty rights are definitely being a thing that is quite a concern. My chief, Kelsey Jacko, and uncle, he mentioned that First Nations and Métis settlements are all kind of being treated the same way, which is a slap in the face to our treaties, because we are separate nations. So each and every single one of us needs to be spoken to as if we are we have sovereignty over the lands that we occupy, which is a really important thing. And Pathways Alliance does not care about that. I could say that for sure. And beyond that, they are it's 400 kilometers of pipeline that they're hoping to create. And I've been in conversation with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. We did consultations in Lac La Biche as well as St. Paul, and the folks in St. Paul, they've been very concerned about this. There was an article in the Narwhal, and Amel as well as Anna, they were real champions with speaking to me and bringing together a large part of the community. And a lot of them have felt completely powerless to affect change in their communities, and being able to say no to this project, because with the more research they've done, they found that it's quite dangerous and ineffective. And the storage site itself is going to be huge. They have alleged that they don't have specific sites marked out yet, but the proposed injection site is north of Cold Lake, all the way south of Vermilion to the Saskatchewan border, and then to west of St. Paul. So those folks in St. Paul, they received some more detailed maps that they shared with me, and they found that this pipeline will be crossing a waterway, which is very concerning to many of the farmers who came out concerned about this. I can also say that, once they inject this product, this carbon product, into the earth, there's no guarantee it will stay there. They're relying on what's called basal Cambrian sandstone, which is a porous rock and it will be the cap rock for the tens of millions of liquid carbon that they're hoping to inject. And they're planning to inject 10 to 12 million tons of this liquid carbon per year in this area. And they want to do it up till 2050 and beyond. And at some point, it will go from being the responsibility of the Pathways Alliance to that of the province. So it's going to land on taxpayers again later if this is built. And beyond that, the impacts on water are significant. And we don't actually have the exact numbers yet. I've been speaking with some of my friends at Environmental Defense. They're going to be trying to grab the exact numbers. But what we know from power plants at this time is that it can increase the water use of a facility up to 200%. And what we know about Fort McMurray at this time and all of the oil and gas refineries out there is that they use about as much water as 2 Calgarys for their oil production. So it will take 4 Calgarys if it's added up to 200%, if it adds 200% of water use to that. And that's water use to a level that the human mind can't even comprehend. And does Alberta have that much fresh water to use to just essentially like waste? I don't think so. And I don't think that we should be utilizing it to create another incredibly dangerous product. And for the effect, for it being an efficient technology, there has been findings that once it is stored in the earth, there are times where it bubbles back up and it releases back into the atmosphere, becoming an ineffective technology. And I also want to make sure people are aware that what I have heard said by the company is that if they find that the carbon product, if it is found to be leaking into a aquifer, they will cut off the pressure. They'll stop the pipeline for pushing more of the chemical pressurized liquid carbon into the earth. But my response to that is that does not guarantee all of that carbon will not leak into the aquifer. And these aquifers, they're precious. They're extremely important. And if they are poisoned and destroyed, it impacts many, many, many life forms. And at Keepers of the Water, for us, water is extremely important. We acknowledge that, it's a living thing. When we speak about water, we try to be in relationship to it. We pray with water. We'll go out to the land and we'll speak with water. Because we know that if we're going to go ahead and say that we want to go ahead and speak for the water, we need to have a relationship with it in that way. And yeah, there's many different things that are extremely concerning about this project, but that's a number of them. And I also really want to say that we don't know how massive amounts of carbon will act over the next 100 years. We don't know what earthquakes will do with that carbon. How much it will leak out or down in this porous rock. There are risks that leaks may contaminate groundwater and whole entire aquifers. And also there's little in the way of regulation of carbon infrastructure. One example is that there is no site-specific emergency response required for carbon pipeline storage hubs in Alberta. And our First Nations communities And all rural communities at this time have an extremely hard time responding to wildfires, let alone we have some understanding of oil and gas pipelines with our fire crews and our emergency responders, but carbon is a brand new thing. And will these companies commit to funding our firefighters and our emergency responders to have the knowledge to respond in an effective way? There's nothing in the law that says that they have to. So that's a major problem. And we need to make sure that we can respond in an effective way. Now I see that we are I'm getting to the bottom of what I am my allotted time, but I just need to check if I have any more notes that I need to really say. I'm happy Jeremy got to get through a lot of it, but yeah, I also forgot to mention, this is a very important point. 7 different First Nations have called for an environmental impact assessment on this particular project. And our science advisor has stated that if an environmental impact assessment happens, it's likely to kill the project because carbon capture is built on bad science.
Right.
And I think I'll leave it there because we'll talk a little bit more as well. So thank you very much, everyone.
Nigel, thank you for speaking to us today, but also for doing this work. Like it's incredibly important, and I think what you've done here is open up a piece that certainly was not very obvious to me when I thought about carbon capture and storage, because there's this interim piece, which is a transportation, which is what the pipeline will do, and the impact of transporting CO2 in whatever form it's in, whether it's liquefied or whatever, through communities is something that I think very few of us have thought about. And as you suggest, your communities are going to be hit with this very quickly.
Alice, one thing I just want to mention, with carbon and all the chemicals that exist within the pressurized carbon, it eats away at the pipe. So it's not if, it's when the pipes will rupture.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you've emphasized, Dolores and I have been working on, the impact of fracking. And like when you think about some whole other process of depositing, the substances and polluted water into, the subsurface is just, Alberta, I'm surprised that Alberta is not in one permanent earthquake.
Yeah.
Now, Zoe,
Yes.
so Nigel and to the keepers, deeply appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing it with us today. Now, I understand there's a bunch of questions that people have been asking, and I'd like to open us up into a more general conversation.
Right. And people are free to continue putting their questions into the chat or into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And I wanted to start though just by doubling back to Nigel for a second.
Zoe,
Yes.
Zoe, can I just interrupt? Jesse Cardinal is with us, and maybe just, is there a way to just say hi to Jesse?
Hi, Jesse is the Executive Director of Keepers of the Water. Thank you so much for joining today, and if you are able to speak or put a message in, we would love to hear from you.
Thanks, that's good.
Alrighty. Nigel mentioned that this is exempt from environmental assessment. Is that correct? Is that what's happening with these projects? The Pathways project is not being assessed for its environmental effects.
As far as I know, at this time, carbon capture projects don't necessarily need an environmental impact assessment in Alberta legally, which is insane. So
Yeah.
that's something that we could try to do. We could try to get the lawmakers to say that, like, we need to protect our communities. We need this in place, which will make it more
Absolutely.
difficult for the company to make this project happen. Yeah, and it's super important to do that. You know, every single person in the province of Alberta needs to be safe from these like mega projects.
Right. And just to add to that, the AER's reasoning for not ordering an environmental impact assessment was, first of all, that when the legislation was written, uh carbon capture wasn't, at least it wasn't contemplated like on an industrial scale, right? Like carbon capture has been around since the 70s, and it was conceived specifically to, like, recycle CO2 to drill for more oil, right? But more recently, as there's been a consensus that climate change is real. It's caused by largely by fossil fuels, and that it needs to be addressed and we need to reduce emissions. Then industrial level CCUS has become this very convenient solution for industry. Another argument the AER made, and this was, on the company's part, this was quite clever, was that they split the project into so many different components that they're like, there is no one project. It's just all these different components. Um, um, and so that makes it harder to challenge, because then you have to, as Chief Jacko's told me, because there's so many different envelopes of paperwork, it's harder for a First Nation, or even a group of First Nations who don't have nearly as much resources as big oil, to challenge each and every one.
Right. Well, it's a whole can of worms. We have a question here from the audience, from Mary, who would like to know, can you tell us how to find out what chemicals are added to the liquefied carbon dioxide? Is there a way to get that information?
Now, the information that I received is from a presentation done by Erica Pensini of the University of Guelph, and she gathered a collection of six of the different chemicals that are involved, that are utilized to ensure that the carbon stays a liquid. So that's Erica Pensini of the University of Guelph. I'm sure that she has probably put out a study that kind of covers all of the chemicals that go into to this process.
Right. I'm sure they'd rather we didn't know. We have another question about how is captured, this is Christopher asking, how is captured carbon used to enhance the recovery of fossil fuels from old wells?
Yeah, I'm not great with the sciencey stuff, but I know that the gist of it is that the liquefied CO2, right, that sort of flows from the pipeline, is injected into the well, which through some sort of scientific magic that I don't understand, enhances the flow of the oil. It reduces its viscosity, right? So it thins it a bit, and or increases its pressure. So it just makes it flow easier, rather than using traditional drilling practices that require a lot more energy to like get the oil flowing. You sort of reuse carbon dioxide that's already been used in extraction, to make the drilling process less energy intensive.
Okay, I'm trying to visualize it, but yeah, the science is, again, this is all very new and untested, I would think. So we have another question here from Thomas asking, what about burying carbon dioxide in saline aquifers, such as the Precambrian basement, to avoid incremental emissions from enhanced oil recovery? Is there a way to safely store CO2, I think is the question.
I think that we are at a time where it's really difficult to say 100% certainty that you can safely bury CO2 for the next 100 years. We have seen these projects where the CO2 will bubble up and release back into the atmosphere. Jeremy, do you have any ideas on anything else to say about this?
Yeah, from my limited understanding again of the scientific side of the oil and gas extraction and carbon sequestration process, I think deep saline aquifers are like seen as like a potentially promising solution to the problem of just like storing it underground and just risking it coming to the surface and affecting the land and water, but again, there's going to be risk. I mean, no matter what, right? The best way to sequester carbon dioxide is, the natural world, trees, mushrooms, peatland, right?
Yes,
But all these things, of course, are getting destroyed
right.
by the oil and gas extraction process, right? So it requires companies to come up with these absurd like technological fixes when the answer is like right in front of us. And it's in terms of generating power, it's wind, it's solar, it's I mean, oil and gas, yes, but winding it down, not increasing production, but having a managed decline. Nuclear, where I mean it already exists. I don't think we should be building new nuclear power plants. Yeah, I mean that I think is the way to do it, because I mean, I think boosters of CCUS, they're just constantly looking for a way to sell it and to minimize the great costs, both financial and environmental, for it. And so they'll say, oh, look, what if we build these saline aquifers to store underground? And might be safer than these storage hubs that Pathways is proposing, or a storage hub rather. But the safest thing is to phase out the tar sands, just like
Absolutely.
we're phasing out coal.
Phasing out demand, phasing out consumption, exports, etc. Absolutely. I want to come back to that point in a minute, but Jessie has her hand up, and Jessie Cardinal, would you please add to the discussion here?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm on mom duty right now. So
Uh,
but I just want to emphasize that we should not be looking at storing toxic waste underground. It should not ever be normalized as an option. So what these companies and corporations do is they'll say, oh, well, there's just this like, you know, empty say cavern or this saline aquifer, like as if it's wasteland and it's just this empty place waiting for toxic waste to be dumped in it. But there are entire ecosystems underground that are so complex that we are just starting to understand the science of how underground aquifers, you know, how they communicate with surface water and how they interact. So you know, I wish Paul Belanger, our science technical advisor, was on the call because we've had many discussions with independent underground water scientists, water geologists who just think this is completely absurd, the idea of storing carbon underground, and that it, you know, it could cause earthquakes. What if it cracks? And that and it also sets a precedence that it's okay to store toxic waste underground. And so then it allows for some of the things that Jeremy is talking about of an increase in production, because it's just saying, well, we've solved the climate crisis, like it's okay, but you know, it's not okay. And it's just going to continue to allow Alberta operating with business as usual. Alberta already is the biggest oil and gas producer in the country of Canada, and Daniel Smith wants to double that. Like, these people are not thinking logically. And so there needs to be logic in the conversation of, no, it's not okay to dump toxic waste underground. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's part of Mother Earth. And just because we think of it as, or scientists, whoever, these oil industry people are thinking of it as a resource that they can use, that they can dump. And Nigel, I see your comment here that it's
Yeah, to
Penny
add to that,
Fox. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
Penny Fox from St. Paul in the Narwhal stated that you know, they're calling it a storage site. Well, what it really is a waste dump, a toxic underground waste dump, a massive toxic underground waste dump that will see 10 to 12 million tons of waste go into it every single year, which is crazy.
That's unbelievable, but they're doing it. It's like the mad scientists. Another question here from Mark. How much energy is used to capture carbon and then transport it to the final destination? Surely that's a lot of energy to scrub it, cool it, compress it, and transport it. Where is that energy coming from? And doesn't that just add more carbon to the atmosphere? Is it just from the grid? This is like electricity, like hydro.
Jesse, come back. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I zoned out.
Do we know how much energy is used to capture the carbon? Is there and how much energy is used to capture carbon and transport it to the final destination? And commenting that this must take a lot of energy, like comparing it in my mind to LNG, which takes a phenomenal amount of energy to pressurize.
Right, because the liquefaction
Yeah.
itself, I don't have specific numbers,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, liquefying a gas is an energy intensive process. I mean, in the context of LNG, which I'm glad you brought up, Zoe, um, you know, there was a study, you know, it was reported in The Guardian, which is, you know, very good climate coverage, I think, that found that exporting LNG, when you factor everything in, you know, the liquefaction, the you know, turning it back into a gas, shipping it, it actually produces more emissions than coal, right?
Yeah.
Than just burning coal, right? So that's also always a part, you know, there's so much trickery that industry uses.
Yes.
And I think CCUS is really hydrogen too is very emblematic of that, where it's like, yes, we're reducing our emissions, but we're not actually reducing emissions because we're increasing production of oil and gas that's going to get burned and used. So it actually just it's increasing emissions, increasing profit
Yes.
for these companies while paying them to do so, and making the problem worse while they get to claim that they're doing their part and pat themselves on the back. And but yeah, I mean, I know in the case of Shell, right, as I mentioned in my presentation, the Quest plant, the CCUS there emits more carbon than it captures, right?
Right.
So and that is considered like the gold standard for CCUS. So it tells you something.
Outrageous. Alice, you are waiting to speak. Go ahead.
So one of my questions is, Nigel, do you know where the liquefaction sort of plants might be that are related to the this particular to the particular plant? Like, what communities will that process be in? And then I have another question.
So the particular plants where
The, li-
this proposed,
the liquefaction process, where that actually might be, because those are big operations too, right?
yes, they're massive. So
Yeah.
what I am aware of is this technology will be equipped on I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I believe 13 oil and gas facilities, and
Oh,
they are along a huge route. So the liquefaction process would need to be at each and every single one of those individual plants to funnel into the pipeline. And those the sites of that are all over near Fort McMurray, like Horizon, Curl, Firebag, Mildred Lake, Suncor Base Plant, Christina Lake, 2 in Christina Lake, Kirby South, Primrose North, Primrose South, Imperial Oil Cold Lake, and Wolf Lake with Canadian Natural. Many different plants will be participating in this, and the pipeline is all along that route. So the liquefaction process will need to be at each one of these plants.
okay.
Right.
My second question is, so you're doing a campaign, and can you yet tell us about how people who are not involved in any of those communities, how we can contribute or participate, or how do we join you?
At this point, I think that assisting in the call for the environmental impact assessment from the 7 different First Nations would be really effective. Anybody who is a part of the Liberal Party, if we can move the Liberal base to understanding more about the dangers of carbon capture, there might be a little bit more second guessing. Because I don't feel like Mark Carney was really speaking in good faith in terms of utilizing this as a green solution. And I really don't know if the Liberal Party understands the carbon capture technology in depth yet. I think they're mostly working with these oil and gas companies to utilize that carbon credit that they created, and they think that this might be a good solution to just burn a whole bunch of that money. So if we can kind of destabilize that the belief that this is a good idea in the Liberal Party, and have them shift towards the side of maybe this is a bad idea, that would go a long way. And taxpayers in general, this is a huge giant project. Everyone should be making their MPs aware of this and their MLAs, and we should all be coming together and really like making a huge voice to stop this project. So we'll probably be going through traditional means of making like raising our voices with this in that way, and we'll see what the future holds. But at this point, like we would like to just make sure we have as many people as possible informed about this particular issue, and try to start changing hearts and minds, and particularly in the Liberal Party, because they're pushing it so hard, and seeing if we could impact change that way.
Right.
Okay.
Very
Well,
good.
I think that's a really good point at which to start to conclude. I think the Watershed Sentinel will be digging into some of these questions, especially the EAI for sure. That's a no-brainer. And of course the whole scheme strikes me as something from Monty Python, or it's insane. It's insane in its conceptualization. It's insane in its cost, and it's insane in its ineffectiveness. So, and never mind the danger and all the rest of that. So we're going to have to do some more work on this. We're going to have to really bring it forward to people's consciousness in terms of understanding how what a useless attempt to avoid the inevitable it is. I think that's the best way. It's just an excuse to capture a little bit of carbon so that we can sell more carbon to be released somewhere else in the world. Now that's it's never mind. I could rant forever. The other thing that we're going to do in the magazine as soon as we can is get to the questions that were raised about small nuclear as an alternative to fossil fuels. Because I personally believe that nuclear of any kind comes with its own problems, and I'm not even sure how carbon efficient it would be. Never mind if you have little nuclear plants everywhere, what's going to happen? How are you going to get the trained operators to deal with this? I mean, it's stupid. The whole thing makes no sense. That's all I have to say. But I think I should be, instead of ranting, I should be thanking Nigel and Jeremy very much for starting to lay out this enormous scam for what it is. And we will do our best to spread the word. I want to thank everybody from the Watershed Sentinel, Zoe in particular, but also Claire, who you haven't met, but who helped us publicize this. And I want to thank Jesse for dropping in. And I'd also like to give great thanks to the Sentinel Educational Foundation, which sponsored this program and will be helping sponsor the way we spread the word even further. There's some more detailed information in the article that Jeremy wrote in the Watershed Sentinel, this issue. And Keepers of the Water has part of their website has keepersofthewater.ca educational resources, which I think are very good. Also, we're going to mail out a resource sheet after this. There's more resources coming in the chat as I speak. But we'll be mailing out a resource sheet to all the registrants, and it'll be posted on our webinar page as well. Alice, have I left anything out?
I don't think so.
Okay. So then all I can say is thank you to everybody for joining us, and good luck to us all as we go on with this issue.
And I think, Nigel and Jeremy, I really appreciate meeting you. And these events always make me feel as if the country like, the country isn't abstract. It's really excellent to meet people in other parts of the country who are working on these issues, even in this format. And I really appreciate you being with us. It's great. Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so, thanks
Yes,
so much
yes.
for thanks so much for having me, and it was really great to hear Nigel and Jesse and everyone else's insights. Because while I'm just writing about it, Nigel and Jesse in particular are actually doing things, and so I'm always humbled to hear the perspectives of people who are taking action.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, folks. If I could just say one last thing, there is so much crazy stuff happening in the world, and it's really hard to stay on top of everything. But all this pressure that we create together to make a better, more positive world, if we can envision that, if we could work towards that, as we continue forward and we put more and more pressure, it's going to just take a single act, and everything will change. And I encourage you all to continue working forward. And I thank you all for standing up for water and working with us. And you two are a keeper of the water. So if you can, stay connected with us, and we'll continue in this fight together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Till next time.